Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Political Forum. Tonight, we're going to discuss Facebook. The event title is Facebook's Impact on Our Society. Here's a write-up from the Meetup page. In light of the recent congressional hearing by Facebook's former employee and whistleblower, the time is right to evaluate the role of Facebook in our society and our lives. Let's explore the following themes. Is there something inherently unique about Facebook in ways that how it influences our society and shapes the public discourse, as opposed to other media outlets? Next, has Facebook exploited its young users, especially the teenagers? Do you believe Facebook should be regulated? Apparently, there are some bipartisan momentum behind this move. And if we have enough people later on, that will be the breakout room session topic. So let's see how many attendees we have tonight. The next question is, how rampant is censorship on Facebook? Is there a particular partisan or ideological bias behind it? Next is there a difference between freedom of speech and the so-called freedom of reach? Then the next question is, how should the ethical standards of profits versus people apply in the context of Facebook? In other words, do these companies, who are private companies, although it's traded publicly, do they have any ethical obligations to its users and to society? Next question, did Facebook break any US laws? There are allegations that Facebook put out some misstatements as well as breaking securities laws to its investors and shareholders. Should these allegations be further investigated? Another similar question is, did Facebook break any international laws? There are allegations that Facebook amplified the incitement of violence that are targeted to certain minority groups, i.e. the Rohingya people in Myanmar. Also, there's a civil war right now in Ethiopia. And there's some allegations that there's kind of this incitement of violence and hate speech, which I'm putting in air quotes, that were directed at the ethnic minorities in the Tigray region. So if that's the case, should there be some ramifications for Facebook's enabling of that conduct? And once again, if there's enough attendees later, we will try the breakout room. And the question that I set aside, which I think is certainly, there's a lot of room to debate, which is, has Facebook engaged in a monopolistic behavior? If so, has it violated the antitrust laws? Should it be broken up? And some of the proposals to break up Facebook is to dismantle Instagram, WhatsApp, and its digital currency from the parent company. So those are some of the questions that we will try to navigate through tonight. And I guess before we get started, I think some of you might be wondering, well, why did we single out Facebook as opposed to other social media platforms? Is there something really unique about Facebook as opposed to other competitors out there? And I think the answer is yes. And let me know if you disagree with this idea, because based on the sheer size and the reach of Facebook, again, on any given day, you have upwards of 2.8 to 3 billion with a B, billion active users on its platform. So that is, quite a significant number of people who are on the platform. And also given the reach that it has, Facebook is not a platform where you just use it passively and then you go onto another website. It relies on this, engagement-based model. So based on the size and the reach, I think it is unique. If you look at the number, it would be akin to not a nation, but like a continent, in a sense that you have almost 3 billion active users on any given day. It also has its own internal tribunal system to adjudicate any issues that arise from the user standpoint. It has an oversight committee that also regulates its internal certain policies. In fact, I think it's the oversight committee that suspended Donald Trump for another 2 years. It's also it has its own digital currency called Libra. So in all those things in totality, it sure sounds like a virtual, not a nation, but a continent of its own. So this entity, this community called Facebook that's out there, I think is certainly unique as opposed to whether it's Twitter, or Pinterest or any other social media websites that other people frequent. So that's kind of the backdrop of what we're going to talk about tonight. But what we try to do in this group is we don't look at everything as in like binary, 100% good, 100% bad. There's a lot of nuances with a lot of these topics. And before we get into some of the critical analysis of Facebook, are there any positive attributes, any redeeming qualities of Facebook? If you want to share some of your experiences, whether if it's direct personal or anecdotal, feel free to chime in. I'm always interested to know other people's experiences. So looks like we have some volunteers. So let's start off with Marty. Hey, Marty.
Hey, how's it going? Got here a little bit late, but are there any positive aspects? Sure. I got in touch with some old high school buddies, and it's terrific. It's a lot of fun. So I think Facebook is fine as far as I'm concerned. I know there's been a lot of press about it and a lot of scrutiny, and Zuckerberg has come under a lot of heat. But I haven't really gotten into the details of it. On the surface, my attitude is it's a private business and he could do what he wants. But I'm open to hearing, what other opinions and see where it goes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marty. Let's go to the next two members. So we have Steve and then Jen. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I don't have that much positive to say about Facebook, but just to get it out of the way, obviously reconnecting with old friends and people you haven't seen for maybe decades is a great feature. And I mean, I tend to, most of my friends are somewhat like-minded, either politically or cultural interests and so on. So they alert me to, the sharing feature alerts me to a lot of enjoyable articles, features, whether it's like Monty Python sketches or, something like that, musical groups. And again, the political stuff that I'm, but again, it's not a place I would go to learn, to get access to other views or to learn other things. It sort of reinforces my existing interests. And it's good in that respect, but that pretty much sums up the positive aspects of Facebook for me.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Let's go to Jim.
Yeah, well, yeah, I share all those feelings about Facebook. I certainly use it in all sorts of ways. It's always interesting to see younger people and how they use it. It's sort of amazing because I've watched young people, I'm talking about teenagers, use it like a massive phone book. I did pay attention and have paid attention to the criticisms of Facebook over the years and the, revelations of Haugen that were broadcast on 60 Minutes and also published in the Wall Street Journal. I watched the hearing on Capitol Hill, and always my problem with these arguments about the sort of, the way the algorithms are, and that the more stuff you engage with, the more you're going to hear the same kind of thought. I've never experienced that, and I guess it's because I don't use Facebook that way. I mean, I know they bring up the fact that it's this tool to ideologically impregnate people with all sorts of nefarious ideas. But I guess, what sort of gets me is like, well, where do people stop their critical thinking and put it aside from doing this? So I don't really have a problem with, sort of cursory uses of Facebook, but the issues that are raised at the policy level, I do pay attention to, I do think are important. Although I also have my problems with the politicians because they're always screaming about knocking out internet neutrality, which I totally think is important to maintain.
Okay, thanks, Jim. And if you're also alluding to the section 230 of the federal statute that gives liability shield to internet websites. We're going to certainly discuss that later, because that's one of the proposed remedies by Congress. All right, let's go to James. James?
Yeah, I was just going to say, for me, it's overwhelmingly positive experience, because I only use it to communicate with friends from the 80s and rediscover each other. It's a little bit mystifying to me how this dark side of Facebook originated. How did it come to be? What did it displace? There must have been something. I'm not very clear on how this dark side originated. For me, if you look at my Facebook page, it's just got sailing pictures of, because I do a lot of sailing, and communications with people from the 80s. Very positive.
Okay, thanks, James. Next we have Aya. Are you there?
Okay, so I'm not a heavy user of Facebook, but like just speaking like in general, like I think everything in this world it's a double-edged sword. Anything that's perceived good, there's always a negative aspect to it, and I feel like Facebook, it's really like the experience is really like based on how the user approaches it. And the same with banking, for example, like and when Wall Street went crazy with all these, exotic, financial instruments. Initially, it was meant for like hedging, and it was intended. Financial engineering was, intended to bring about effective ways to hedge risks. However, there's always, like shrewd people, lawyers, or not even lawyers, like people who try to like exploit the system, exploit the regulations, and create something that are, like that will bring about profit to themselves without like really figuring out what would be the ramifications if it goes out of control. And then it's always an afterthought when regulations, kick in and start to like, bring things back to order. So I think Facebook is at a place where, it was, originally intended to be good, like, and there were people who exploited it, and now I think it's time when regulators, same with how the banking industry like grew. It's time for Facebook to be heavily regulated. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for those comments. I think Facebook might be a classic example of where the laws did not really catch up with the advent of technology, and now these lawmakers are scrambling to do something, but I think the genie's already out of the bottle, and we'll certainly get to that later. But if I could address James's main kind of salient point, which is Facebook used to be innocent, and all of a sudden what happened? Let me answer that question, and we'll kind of work ourselves kind of backwards in terms of the chronology. So Facebook became a publicly traded company in 2012. By the time they had their IPO in May of 2012, there was a lot of pressure for them to really, drive up investments, and their platform really changed tremendously. So I know that the company doesn't use the terms like Facebook 1.0, 2.0, but I think that the categorization is kind of useful here. So I think Facebook 1.0 was kind of the early days of Facebook, about right before the IPO, and just the explosion of Facebook. I think it was almost inevitable, because you first had Google, who was going to make information accessible at the tip of your fingers. You just type in things into the search engine and you'll get results. Now, whether those results are accurate or not, that's a whole nother debate. but certainly Google wanted to, their mission was to try to conquer the information age. And the rise of this control of the social connection was almost inevitable. Facebook 1.0, and I also used Facebook during its early iterations, probably from like 07 to 09, but it was more like a passive use. And I think the growth was inevitable because people were yearning for some type of social connection. Now that we have this digital platform, we want to reconnect with not just the people in our current community, but those from the past. I remember at the time there were websites like classmates.com, yearbooks.com. All these websites were becoming very popular because people wanted to reconnect. And there's a reason why Facebook became very popular because they were able to successfully make it very user-friendly and also have a very good user experience. So I think Facebook 1.0, they were successful in a sense that I think their main focus was this thing called MSI, which is the meaningful social interaction. That means just connecting with your family, friends, and those around you, whether if it's looking at vacation pictures or pictures of puppies, very innocent, innocuous, nothing really controversial. And I think in a run-up to the IPO, there was this mass drive within the corporation to introduce things like news feeds, Facebook groups, and then they partnered with third parties so that they could sell data, user data, to these third-party vendors. And I think that's really where things became, in some instances, very dark. And that's kind of what we're going to explore today. And I think once we got into the Facebook 2.0 era, which is, we're still in the 2.0 era, it became what's, it's based on this idea of, engagement based system. So, the idea is have a user go onto the platform and just be engaged for the maximum amount of time. Now, that might be okay if you're an adult, but could you imagine if you are, a younger person, teenager, who is just overwhelmed with all this information, and you can't really filter out what is good, what is bad, what's true, false, and plus along the way, Facebook also bought out its competitors, namely Instagram, because they understood that the power of the visual effects, the visual appeal was really what attracts younger users. So once they acquired Instagram, I think it was in 2010 or 11, they pretty much sealed the fate for the rest of other social media competitors. So I think that's kind of how we got to where we are. Any questions so far before we move on to the next things that Facebook's doing? Okay. So, I mean, there are some, real serious allegations at Facebook, because of this engagement-based model. And, the former Facebook employee testified at the Hill last week. This really attracts extremism. People are driven to a lot of the extremist ideas, whether if it's conspiracy theories or just crazy ideas about inciting violence, hate groups, you name it. So that's where it just gets very dark. I believe the actual term is called engagement-based ranking. So they have these algorithms where they want to tell the user what type of content they should check out because it's engagement-based ranking. And they've done a lot of these studies where if you're just a casual user with no particular ideological bias, you might just go onto Facebook just to check out a few news articles or postings. And next thing you know, you go down that rabbit hole of whether if it's QAnon or anti-vaccine or whatever. You just go down that list. And I think the prevalence of all these weird and wild conspiracy theories, I think Facebook is really one of the sources of that kind of flame, fanning the flames. One thing that's going on right now at Facebook is, I don't know if you've heard, there's a lot of human trafficking going on. I mean, that's been going on throughout history, but I think that has been facilitated by the use of Facebook. And what they do is they, they recruit these people to be, involuntary participants in human trafficking, and they also arrange, the transactions. So I remember in 2019, Apple actually told Facebook that they could no longer engage in that kind of behavior. Otherwise, they're going to terminate their partnership on its app platform. So that's one, very troubling aspect of Facebook. Another troubling aspect is, again, with this incitement of violence. It's not as prevalent in the US, but throughout the world, there has been instances where Facebook, there are certain extremist groups who are using this platform to propagate hate speech, incite violence, and quite frankly, target certain ethnic minorities. And that's been going on in Myanmar, targeting the Rohingya people, who are the ethnic minorities. This has been well documented in Ethiopia right now with its, civil conflict that's going on right now. So really the question is, what type of a responsibility does Facebook have? I mean, can it just simply sit back and say, well, we're just a platform, we're no different than, some, like a place that provides physical, venue, and people could come and they could congregate as much as they want to. And when things get out of control, you can't really blame the owner of the physical venue. Just like with the digital platform, it seems like they're taking a very hands-off approach. So why don't we pause it there? And here's the question: does Facebook have any, ethical duty to make sure that its platform is safe? Any responses to that? Okay, looks like we got Jim, Marty, and Lorraine. So let's start with Jim first.
Well, yes, it does have an ethical responsibility. And I would recommend people read the front page article in Atlantic Magazine this week, because what it highlights is the collapse of newspapers around the United States and the question of fact-based journalism. It talks about how it basically targets a hedge fund operator who essentially buys newspapers and guts them. But the whole question of the broader collapse of fact-based journalism locally is something that is associated with higher tendencies in the areas where there's been a collapse of facts-based journalism in the United States, with the prevalence of ideas like QAnon, like anti-vaxxer thought, et cetera. It's in Atlantic Magazine. It's a very powerful article by, I think his name is Kopkis or something like that, but I recommend it to all. The question of, I go back to thinking about when I first read about the internet, which was in the early 90s. And when someone showed me the ARPANET back in the 80s, which, I didn't know anything about that stuff. But the whole idea of the internet was this great freedom, this great ability to transfer ideas in a free way, in a way beyond anything we've been used to. And so what's always troubling in these debates that we're going through right now is how far we've pulled back from that. What to have a situation where we're basically talking about applying antitrust laws. It's sort of like thinking about the early 19th century when they're going after, big steel to break them up. And that's where we've gotten to at this point. But I do think they bear an ethical responsibility, particularly in the examples you raised, Thomas, the issue of Rohingya, the use of the Facebook in the case of what happened in Myanmar. The state used it to encourage ethnic cleansing. And so I think that Facebook, to try to cop a plea on that one, is a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And the crisis in Myanmar is really troubling because, again, the problem with Facebook is that they don't really have like a consistent community standard. I mean, they say that, well, we have this internal mechanism to filter out bad behavior and suspend or ban certain bad actors. Okay, that's well and good, but if they had a consistent policy, certainly some of the extremist groups like in Myanmar There's this, Buddhist nationalist who's basically calling for, massive massacre of ethnic minorities. I mean, they should be banned from Facebook, but they're not. In fact, he's got a profile right now on Facebook with probably, thousands, if not millions of followers. So that's one of the troubling factors about Facebook, is that they don't have a consistent standard, and they, use whatever metaphor, kick the can down the road, sweep it under the rug. These things are not handled on a consistent basis. So that's one of the troubling things. And really the thing is, you want to hold these companies accountable. I mean, yes, they're private, but at the same time, there's a social cost to how they operate their business. So when there's a social cost, even if it's not a tangible social cost, it should still be looked at. There has to be some repercussion. And I don't know what those repercussions are. I'm obviously not, that's above my pay grade, but that's something worth looking into. All right, let's go to Marty, Lorraine, then Pete.
Thank you. So, first I want to add that at least a few times a week, I get into heated political debates on Facebook with my peers. I wouldn't say they're my friends. People friend me. I don't know who half of them are, but I'll friend anybody. And next thing I know, I'm up to my neck in political debates, which I love, and that's why I'm here, because I love debate. So I think it's fine. A couple of people have defriended me because they didn't like my positions, and that's the way that goes. In terms of ethical responsibility, does Zuckerberg have an ethical responsibility? I've heard I've heard someone say, some talk show host whom I respect, I don't remember which one because I listen to quite a few, but I only listen to those whom I respect. And one of them said that when Zuckerberg was once testifying before Congress, he kind of chided Congress, said, go ahead, regulate me, tell me what you want me to do. But they're not giving him any specific regulations. They're just telling him, he needs to do a better job somehow. It's very vague. In my personal opinion, does he have an ethical responsibility to patrol what people put on his platform? And I'm inclined to say no, that he does not have that ethical responsibility. And I say that as someone who's potentially a victim. There are people who've, as you know, Thomas, and probably several others, I'm Jewish, and there've been quite a few attacks and murders of Jews here in the United States, and very often I hear that the murderers had posted on Facebook how much they hate Jews and that kind of thing, and I think they have that right to talk about how much they hate Jews. I wouldn't try to stop them legally anyway, or any other way. I'm only concerned about behavior. And most people who hate Jews or hate any other group don't do a thing about it, thank God. And so I would let it be for the moment anyway. That's my position. Thank you.
Yeah, the topic of regulation is a kind of thorny one, because I think when Zuckerberg told the lawmakers on the Hill, come and regulate us, that's kind of calling us bluff, because ultimately what they're trying to regulate are these algorithms. And again, it's a technical question. How do you regulate algorithms? Obviously, with the engineers that Facebook has, they are light years ahead of any lawmakers. But the idea is that let's not make these algorithms so addictive where you just sit there and dwell for hours on end. And that's really the Facebook model. Maybe others don't use Facebook in that kind of fashion. It's more casual. But if you look at like an average Facebook user, especially the younger users, they spend hours. And the idea is, again, this engagement-based ranking, and the algorithm just makes it more enticing to a level of, it's almost like an addiction. I know that's a very like an extreme description, because we think of addiction as like opioids or some other, physical substance like nicotine. But, you can certainly make an argument that these algorithms certainly has this addictive, compulsive characteristics, especially for the younger users. All right, let's go to Lorraine and then Pete.
So, yeah, I don't think that, I think we have to remember that the business model for many things in the entertainment industry is to get your attention and to keep your attention. And after all, the whole advertising wing of it that's tied to it is that people are going to see the advertisements, and they pay a lot of money for that. So we can't say don't make the site sticky, don't do something to not have people stay on the site, because that really is how they operate. That would be like saying make a movie or have a concert, a music concert, but don't let people really come to it. Just let them come for a little while and they can't stay, or they can't come at all. So I think we have to be careful thinking about that part of it. And you don't regulate the algorithm so much as, I think the more fundamental issue here is that the algorithm has told them what it is that keeps people on the site, and what keeps them is negative things. Negative things tend to keep people on the site much more than positive things. And as a result, that's what's more effective for their bottom line. And that is where I think the issue really comes up, because you can say all sorts of nice things on Facebook, and it's not going to do the trick. But when you have violent things, negative things, that's what people really share often. And so, they would say, they have responsibility to their shareholders to maximize their profits. And they would say that their responsibility is not to have people not come to their site for very long. I think that the issue is what is the negative, what are the kinds of negative things that they're going to allow on there? And that's unfortunately that has gotten out of hand. But it's kind of, I don't blame Facebook so much. I think reality TV kind of set the tone far before Facebook came on the scene, of people wanting to see outrageous personal things of everyday people. I kind of think that they just are part of that same wave. So yeah, so my answer is yes, it should be regulated, but not by telling people to not come to the site, but by asking them not to show certain kinds of content. Thanks.
Right. Our culture is certainly based on, if it bleeds, it leads, a lot of outrageous, the conduct and stories certainly attract. That's why we have a lot of sensationalism, whether it's in, tabloids or in our entertainment industry. And Facebook certainly capitalized on that. But I think the idea behind regulating algorithms, I know that sounds like a very, kind of like a tyrannical idea, but I think what they're proposing is that if you, let's say, sign up for Facebook, you should be given an option, yes or no, check one or the other box. Do you want to be manipulated by these algorithms, or do you want to opt out of it so that you could just, kind of have a more like a free will type of user experience? You don't want these suggestions or news feeds or other ads popping up. That's really the question. And right now, there is no option like that. I know there are privacy settings where you could certainly, shield off, certain private information from people who are not in your network. But right now, that's not happening. The second thing is, Facebook has relied on AI to kind of oversee a lot of these, bad behavior that takes place on its platform. And when you have, 3 billion active users, yet your security team is only like 10,000, 15,000. I know 15,000 sounds a lot, but if you do it based on per user, that's very minuscule. So you would think for a company that's successful, they would invest more in kind of monitoring this bad behavior, a live person, as opposed to just, relying on AI to take care of it. And I think that's where, if you look at a lot of the commentary, that's where Facebook fell short, in that they only wanted to maximize profits. And in order to do that, they have to really downsize a lot of these personnel. The person that gave the testimony at the Hill last week, the whistleblower, I think the tipping point for her was in a run-up to the 2020 presidential election. They had this civic integrity team. Basically, their job was to monitor any fake news, negative political ads, and such. And they thought they did an okay job. And after the elections, they just kind of patted themselves on the back and they just dismantled the team. Like, well, gosh, we dodged that bullet. Now the election is over. Let's get rid of this team and let's pretend, nothing, let's just go back to our old ways. And I think that was really the tipping point, because these things just don't go away because the presidential cycle ended. These things will just keep on perpetuating. And I just think for a company that's successful, they could certainly invest more of their capital into monitoring these types of bad behaviors. All right, let's go to Pete, Jim, and then Ella.
Yeah, I think in terms of regulation, I think that and Facebook's ethical response, I think there's like two pieces. So I think one that Lorraine was mentioning around the content that's on the site, and I think it's unfair for Facebook to position themselves as a neutral platform, because they actually do have these algorithms, right? My experience and someone else's experience are different. They are actually, through their algorithms, putting different things in my feed and actually controlling what it is that I see. So it's not really fair for them to, make the argument that they're a purely neutral place. And they are, I think there's then a question of, so I think, one on the content side, but then also, there is just this question of, yes, it is their optimized model for their shareholders to, get people to stay on their sites and frankly, to amplify some certain voices that maybe not would have been amplified if in a world where Facebook or other types of social media like this wouldn't exist. But we as a society probably also need to take a look at and say, well, actually, is that actually beneficial for society that those types of things exist? And as you were mentioning, Thomas, I think, addiction, I think that people have shown that the new content things can give people the same kind of chemical dopamine hits that are like addiction. And, and so, I think there's even a question, beyond Facebook's responsibility on content, but to question, is this, are there more things be regulated because of the impacts that they're having on individuals and on society?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And just to build on that comment and Lorraine's previous comment, just the idea that, well, hey, look, if Facebook is such a bad place to be, just stop using it. It's not as easy as that, because this has been well documented. There's also a documentary which I found to be pretty compelling on Netflix, The Social Dilemma, where, as Pete has suggested, there's all these like incentive structures where they want to have the users keep coming back again, and whether if it's certain like notification sounds or certain instant messages that you see pop on the screen, it's like a reward for the user to keep engaged. And I think there comes a point where those things are nice, but if your life 24 hours a day is dependent on that, where you need another hit, if you will, kind of like if you're like a junkie, and I think that's certainly problematic. And I just think we haven't looked at it from that angle as a society. We always look at things that are addictive based on certain like physical addiction, again, nicotine, opioids, that kind of thing. But I think it's perhaps we could look at social media as that kind of with that kind of addictive quality. Just one more thing, and then we'll get to Jim next. They did a study with young users who use Instagram, and cyberbullying is just rampant. Where like I guess when before social media, when people were being bullied, at least if you were the victim of being bullied in school, you could go back home, and in the comforts of your home, you're no longer bullied because you're not in the halls of the school. But with social media, you're constantly being bullied on Instagram. So from the moment when you get up to the moment you go to bed, if these young users are using Instagram, that could have a tremendous effect. And just to tell someone to stop using it, I don't think that's the right approach, because it's really hard, because like, everything that these young users, their everyday lives are interconnected with these platforms. All right, let's go to Jim and then Ella.
Well, just to follow up on what you said, Thomas, we know that kids have committed suicide because of the bullying they get on Facebook or Instagram. And that's made into a political issue. And what gets me is that they don't evaluate in their algorithms what is being engaged with. They just do it mathematically and promote more engagement. And there's a different way to look at this. You get 3 billion users plus on Facebook. I think if they get between 2.7 and 3 billion, that's something way beyond anything we've ever encountered historically. PBS just did a 2-part series on Hearst, which got the first part of it was dealing with how Hearst used the same kind of dopamine measures, if you will, between his conflict with Pulitzer to raise the circulation of his newspapers, sensationalism, when it bleeds, it leads, putting cartoons in the different journals, etc. All sorts of kinds of stories that increased audience. And what did they get? They got up to 1 million people. Well, with Facebook, we're up to 3 billion people. So it's a very different thing. Now, I've had my problems with Facebook. I've actually gotten censoring notes from them every once in a while. I actually had to fight it out a couple of times with their committee because I questioned their arguments. And one argument had to do with something that was discussed earlier, the question of anti-Semitism. I was posting a copy of Triumph of the Will for historical purposes, the film that Leni Riefenstahl did, the great Nazi propaganda film, purely for educational purposes. And their algorithms had gotten to the point where you can't post that anymore, or you can't talk about that anymore. I said, well, wait, here I am talking about it from the educator's point of view. I'm not offering it as a form of propaganda for people to sort of watch and get off on and sort of, luxuriate in the furor in 1934 in Nuremberg. I'm just putting it up for historical purposes. And yet I had a fight with their censorship committee on that. So that's the kind of problematics you get into with Facebook. And I think you really, the issue of Google and YouTube and these other platforms also are important to interrelate with that, because we know that, for example, let's say you wanted to understand something about jihadism and you wanted to go to the horse's mouth. You cannot do that anymore on Facebook because on YouTube, because they took off all the different kind of preaching videos that were launched by that that person was killed in Yemen by a predator, by a drone strike, who was very, very articulate. But again, if one wanted to study that and understand that, that's gone. The reason, of course, is it was looked on as inflammatory and a proselytization, a sort of incitement to violence, which it was. So you get these issues of balance. How do you then try to understand the deeper roots of conflict if you can't even listen to it? If they decide, okay, you can't study this, you can't listen to it because it's deemed as too dangerous. And it's a very different kind of powerful medium. 3 billion people is just totally different than anything we've ever seen before.
Yeah, just to respond to Jim's point, I mean, if you wanted to get a transcript of what this extremist person was saying, I'm sure you could get that. I think, the lawyers at Facebook and YouTube were probably saying, well, look, given the viral nature of these videos, it's going to get, shared or liked or retweeted, and it's just going to go viral. So given how quickly this, video could spread, the speed at which this could spread and incite violence in multiple locations is too dangerous. So they want to basically ban it or get rid of it, as opposed to if it's just like a text. Let's say you take out a book or an excerpt somewhere from the library. I'm sure you can still find that because that is still protected under the First Amendment. Okay. Let's go to Ella and then Andrew.
Hi. So I'm a user of Facebook, and I thought it was hearing everyone's thoughts and discussions surrounding algorithms and people. I think the algorithms are really complex, and their purpose is for users to be engaged. And recently in the news, the whistleblower and then that severe 6-hour outage. But I thought it was really to go back to their mission statement and their current mission statement and then their principles. So there's a lot of, I remember the question, should they actually, if I can remember, should they actually have more moderation and control, and do they have enough resources, or are their algorithms, hopefully, I don't know if they do in all the countries, but their mission statement back in 2017, I read, was to give people the power to share and make the world more open and connected. Currently on their Facebook, on their page, their company page is give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. So it's slightly different and tweaked, but it doesn't go into maybe people who think alike and hate alike builds a hate community. So maybe with that being so vague in their company mission, that's their intent, to bring people together who think alike, even if it's someone who, and it's very sad because I heard someone say, oh, there's humans being trafficking and people have fake accounts and there's a lot of corruption, and they just don't have the people or the algorithms to regulate this and block. And should there be intervention, and what really are their morals? And I think it says it right on their company, their principles too, going down their page. Give people a voice, serve everyone, promote economic opportunity, build connection and community, this is the last one, keep people safe and protect privacy. That's an interesting one because they've been through lawsuits. But the one I find very tricky, we hear about, 3.5 billion users. How is it to serve everyone when, yes, they are a premier company, but they're not when it comes to getting into different countries, regulations, having the proper moderators, and really, I don't believe their algorithms are that complex or that advanced to serve everyone and to be able to moderate all the corruption and the hate. And I don't think it's possible. So I think they're going to miss a lot of that. And really, if they serve everyone and people think differently, and their intention is to give everyone a voice, that's a contradiction because everybody thinks differently.
Thank you for those comments, Ella. I think the takeaway from the whistleblower's testimony on the Hill last week, whether if you agree with her views or not, I think the takeaway is this, is that it's nearly impossible to just eradicate bad behavior on Facebook. I mean, just given the sheer number of the active users. So that really wasn't her point. And I think her point was, look, Facebook could still be a very successful, a viable company. It's just that the way how they make certain decisions, and when they're confronted with this idea of profit versus people, they tend to side more than not on profit. And her really main criticism is that this engagement-based ranking, you could really tone it down. So again, if engagement-based ranking is from 1 to 10, with 10 being the maximum, they put it on 11. And her point, I mean, she didn't really say this directly, but I think her point was that you could still have a reasonable amount of engagement-based ranking, whether it's 5, 6, or 7, and still be profitable, still be very successful platform. But you don't have to turn it, crank it all the way up to 11. And her criticism is that that's the kind of behavior that Facebook is engaging in. And she presented, thousands of pages of documents to the members of Congress. And I guess they came across some internal memo and other documents that show that that is their model. That's really what's troubling here. So again,
I don't disagree with that. I heard that, and I think it's very corrupt, but she did a good thing. And with her having thousands of pages of documentation, I think that's, and to have that proof, but it's really up to Congress, it's really up to the legal members, the Senate now to make a movement, the states. And I think there is a current lawsuit that or back in December 2020, there's like 46 states now in an actual lawsuit. So I agree. I think they are really hacking into people's privacy and psychology.
Right, and I know in the EU there has been like a massive class action lawsuit against Facebook for breach of users' privacy and data. I don't think there's one in the US. Maybe it might be like an individual lawsuit, but nothing to the magnitude of a class action. Okay, we have Andrew next. Go ahead, Andrew.
Hey. Yeah, I think someone mentioned something about the algorithm. I think another thing that sets Facebook more different compared to like Twitter or like YouTube is that there's also much more of an intense echo chamber with Facebook due to the fact that you can set pretty much private forums to allow people in, and that makes more of a toxic echo chamber rather with YouTube or Twitter, where literally everything is out in the open. And I think with the whole notion of pushing sort of like this hate content around on Facebook in terms of the whole non-vaccine kind of situation going on, and the whole like situation going on with Trump, obviously profit is a motive, even with Twitter. In terms of why they wanted to just now deal with Trump and ban him off the site right after he was caught with the insurrection, is obviously a motive for these two. They gain as much profit as possible to get as much attention as possible on their site, because the sad reality of the fact is that these platforms get most of their revenue by how many views they have on their site and how many retention they can get with people paying attention on their site. I don't really use Facebook that much. I mostly use YouTube a lot, but even with these platforms, I don't use my personal information or don't like show my name at all. I mostly just go on Facebook to look at memes. And I only go on Twitter to like see what's going on with like some kind of YouTuber I know or Twitch streamer I know to see what the news is going on. But with Facebook, it's a whole nother beast because Mark Zuckerberg is mostly, it seems like Mark Zuckerberg is in charge of making all these things happen. And it seems to be much of an echo chamber going on at Facebook too, especially with Mark Zuckerberg not allowing any changes to be developed on the platform, especially when it comes to trying to change it in a way to make the algorithm less toxic and trying to get toxic news off the platform. There's also another point in terms with Facebook is that there's a situation, I forgot the situation, but yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to say for now.
Thanks, Andrew. If you think of that situation, let us know. We'll come back to you. And before we get to Jim, some of the internal documents that the whistleblower had prepared or presented to Congress, it's really just mind-blowing. So one memo revealed that there was this kind of like a blueprint, if you will: repetition, redundant, reinforcement, 3 R's, right? And the idea is if you just keep on repeating, no matter how outrageous some posting is, eventually your mind will just kind of pick up on it and it'll legitimize it. So repetition, and sometimes things are just redundant, it's kind of like a little too much to bear, but your mind does pick up on it. And then these algorithms, whether if it's suggestions or ads or newsfeed, it's just going to reinforce your confirmation bias. And that is kind of the model that the executive team at Facebook had decided to go with, because they retool their algorithms so that there is what's called a lot of dwell time. So you just kind of dwell and dwell and dwell, go down that rabbit hole, because that means you're going to be engaged in the platform for a longer amount of time. That means, you know, Facebook gets to sell more ads, or you get to click on certain things that the advertisers have paid money for. And there was even a study that the whistleblower had presented, which in 2018, a study done internally by Facebook, and this is what I read: 64% of Facebook users joined extremist groups based on Facebook's recommendations. So again, if you're wondering, hey, why are people joining all these crazy, you know, conspiracy groups? Well, I think there's the answer. And I think Facebook knows that, but at the same time, again, profit versus people, they decided that we want to have more engagement-based, you know, ranking. So this is what sells. So that's very unfortunate. So that's really one of the biggest revelations, I think, from the congressional hearing last week. Okay, let's go to let's see, Jim, and then Pete.
Well, just to follow up on that, you know, there's 8 lawsuits she entered to the SEC about Facebook based on the documents that she leaked. And one of the internal Facebook documents says this, and I'm quoting, it's from November of 2020. It's from one of the lawsuits she entered, Hogan. Not only do we not do something about combustible election misinformation and comments, we amplify them and give them broader distribution. This is from a Facebook document. We have evidence from a variety of sources that hate speech, divisive political speech, and misinformation on Facebook and the family of apps are affecting societies around the world. We also have compelling evidence that our core product mechanics, such as virality, recommendations, and optimizing for engagement are a significant part of why these types of speech flourish on the platform. So, you know, Zuckerberg was called up to Capitol Hill in March of this year, and he basically said, no, we have no information on this. We have no information that we give disinformation. And, you know, and that's the thing, the incredible power of what Haugen did. You know, she has all these documents basically saying he's full of shit. Now, I know you're going to get to Section 230 later. I'm a big defender of Section 230. I think it has to be defended. But this is the kind of stuff that gets politicians on both sides of the aisle riled up. And the public should be riled up because we're not escaping from this. And then the whole thing that got me with her was she talked about how they dismantled the unit that she was part of after the election. And I don't have to tell everybody, you know, we're looking at all this nonsense that we're experiencing around the country where people, I mean, today, the whole question of the elections being a steal and all that. Well, again, Facebook and social media are partly responsible for exacerbating these social divisions.
Right. I think the two main concerns that the whistleblower had was that it's sowing discord through misinformation, disinformation, and secondly, undermining our institutions and our society. So basically, anything that you disagree with, just illegitimate. It's, you know, it's not done with proper authority, and that's really the troubling aspect of Facebook. It doesn't matter which ideological persuasion you have. It just, once you go down that rabbit hole, then everything else is just kind of like your enemy, you know, if you will, because the tendency of these, you know, engagement-based ranking is that it really divides us. And Facebook knows that whatever is very divisive on any given issue or any, you know, news story, they know that is what sells and that is what really ignites engagement. So that's what's really troubling. All right, let's go to Pete, Marty, and back to Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, just you know, picking up on that statistic you had mentioned, Thomas, I think you said about 68% of the, you know, people who are joining extremist groups were actually recommended it by Facebook. I mean, I think it just shows that, really, it's not just that, like, they can have the greatest content curation in the world and try to take down all these things and not let people post things, but at the end of the day, like, it's their algorithm that's actually the cause of a lot of the challenges. It's the recommendations that they are actually making, and so some regulation of how that happens. And then I think that there's some of the other studies that people were mentioning around depression and suicide risk in teenage girls, and like, if we saw, like, I mean, look at, this is maybe a provocative example, look at the opioid companies now, right, who are getting sued for all the promotion they did of products that were addictive, right, and obviously all the harm that they've caused. But if you then look and see, well, is Facebook in some ways doing something similar then, and then are they culpable in that same way?
Thanks, Pete. And some, I guess, commentators liken this moment to when the tobacco executives all, appeared on Capitol Hill. This would have been like, I guess, the mid-90s. They took an oath and basically asked the question to every single, tobacco executive, is nicotine addictive? And they're like, no, it's not addictive. It's very innocuous. And now we know that's really not the case. So whether if it's the tobacco industry, whether if it's the opioid industry, knowingly, distributing these very addictive substances just for their, financial profit, did they go overboard? And some will say, I think we should be asking the same question to Facebook as it relates to how their business model is. And quite frankly, another takeaway from my, watching of the congressional hearing is that there's really no transparency in Facebook. Now, you can make an argument that, well, look, Facebook is a private company. They're entitled to, run their company as the way how they see fit, serve the interests of the shareholders. Fair enough. But it is a publicly traded company after all. It does receive certain protections, such as, Section 230 of the Community Decency Act. So, I mean, it does receive certain benefits from the protections from the government and the laws. So maybe they should at least be more transparent. I think that was another takeaway point from the whistleblowers' congressional hearing. All right, let's go to Marty and then Andrew.
Well, they want to know everything about us, but they don't allow us to know everything about them. It should go both ways.
Jacob,
We should
your
surveil
name is
them.
Jacob. Your name is Jacob, not Marty.
All right, hang tight, Jacob. We'll come back to you. Just hang tight. So Marty, Andrew, then Jacob. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so maybe it's been discussed and I spaced it out or didn't catch it, whatever. But to me, this seems like a free press issue. That Zuckerberg should have and Facebook should have freedom of the press and allowed anybody to put whatever he wants to allow on his platform. I'm still not seeing a problem with it. Back in the old days, we had National Enquirer, to put out conspiracy theories. And I don't recall anybody saying, hey, we got to stop National Enquirer, or people handing out pamphlets on the corner, full of all kinds of, provocative and hateful diatribes. And no one ever said, we got to stop these people from handing out these pamphlets, at least not that I'm aware of. So technology has progressed, and this is the way it's being done now. I just think it's more the same and should be protected by freedom of the press. I want to also mention, Jim mentioned that he put Triumph of the Will on, and it was removed and he had to fight for it. Yeah, I mean, I took a high school not a high school, a college class on World War II, and they showed us the movie Triumph of the Will, and we had an interesting discussion on it. I see no reason to ban that, and then plus, and I think you alluded to this a bit yourself, Thomas, but I think it deserves more space. That is, when people vent all their hatred on Facebook, they're getting a chance to vent. And that could often alleviate or reduce the possibility that they'll actually take violent action. It's normally when you're repressed, when you're not allowed to speak out, that you resort to violence. So I'd rather let people vent. Okay, thank you.
So when Zuckerberg was testifying on the Hill, they asked him, is Facebook a media outlet or is it something else? And Zuckerberg said, no, Facebook is a tech platform. That's all we do. We don't curate any of the content. We don't publish anything. We just simply feed you the news sources from various websites. So on one hand, they want to shy away from the higher both ethical and legal standards of a news publisher or a media outlet. On the other hand, most people get their news from Facebook. So Facebook is the biggest, aggregator, purveyor of news. So it's like they're trying to have it both ways. And to me, I think they should really decide it's either one or the other and not try to kind of dodge around the issue. But up until now, Facebook has been able to get away with that. So that's number one. Number two, yeah, I think Marty's right. People's, the right to vent, to, express their, frustrations. That's certainly a protected speech. But the problem with the current model is that, again, it's based on engagement-based ranking. So certain people's, venting does not get filtered through to another member's profile. So again, Facebook kind of gets to decide which is the right newsfeed for that particular person. And that's based on this, kind of extreme use of the engagement-based ranking algorithm. And, maybe if they toned it down, they might get other, viewpoints. But right now, anyone that goes onto Facebook, they're in this bubble without knowing it. And that's the other part that's very troubling, is that at least you should tell the user that if you don't want to be in the bubble, you should have like an opt-out button or something, but there's nothing like that in the user setting. Okay, let's go to Andrew and then Colleen.
Yeah, just a quick thing I remember in terms of like regulations dealing with Facebook. I think there definitely can be some regulations in terms of forcing Facebook to change its TOS, because I don't think Facebook is like the end all be all place to have an intellectual conversation with people, especially in an echo chamber. But yet again, these are just social media platforms. I mean, if the government can go ahead and force them to say, hey, Facebook, you need to do something with this problem in terms of this issue with spreading toxic propagandist kind of stuff on your platform. There needs to be a change of your TOS. I wouldn't be too like down on that if they did something like that. Because in terms with Facebook, it kind of reminds me of the situation with Alex Jones with his situation with Sandy Hook, in terms of all of a sudden now he wants to say, oh, I'm an entertainer, people shouldn't take me seriously. I mean, I feel like that's such a cop-out excuse for people to not take a responsibility for their actions. And I think the main responsible person who set these places in motion are with Mark Zuckerberg and his actions in terms of not dealing with these issues on his platform. So if the government wants to step in and enforce Facebook to change their TOS so it can make a better, more less echo chamber like environment, I'll be all up for it.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, the terms of service is an interesting topic because, I mean, it's good to have one. Of course, no one reads it when you first sign up because you just scroll right down to the page just to click OK and then sign up. But also the enforceability is highly arbitrary because, again, if you talk to like a Facebook spokesperson, they'll say, oh, yeah, we regulate it based on the community standards, whatever that means. And I just want to run through some examples just to see how arbitrary this is. And I think that's one of the frustrations of tech giants like Facebook, in that they don't have like a universal applicability of their enforcement. It's kind of like they kind of pick and choose who they want to ban or suspend. So here's an example. Of course, right now we're in the middle of a pandemic. So Facebook decided, whether you agree with this or not, that any kind of contrarian views on the pandemic, whether the origins of the pandemic, whether how it's transmitted, whether, if you take certain, I guess, horse tranquilizers, as like, as remedy, they decided to ban all of that because that kind of goes under the umbrella of misinformation conspiracy. Whether if you agree with that approach or not, okay, that's fine and good. But if they're going to get rid of conspiracy theories because it harms the public, why not get rid of all the conspiracy theories, right? So that would be like, if you are a member of the Flat Earth Society, why don't they be banned too? Because I think the science is overwhelming that Earth is not flat, but they exist. What about people who still to this day, ponder on this, JFK assassination conspiracy theory, right? Why do they get to, propagate their conspiracy theories, but not the others? So it seems like if you want to really kind of root out conspiracy theories, then, and, misinformation and disinformation, that all this should be fair game, but it's not. Again, I'm not saying that they should ban these groups. I think I do believe in, having more, expression of speech and ideas is better than less, but you just got to have a consistent approach to this. You can't just pick and choose which ones you want to ban because that's highly arbitrary. Couple other interesting things. So again, Andrew had alluded to individuals who were banned on Facebook. Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, Louis Farrakhan banned from Facebook. Okay, again, whether if you agree with that or not, that's probably based on your ideological persuasion. How about the Buddhist nationalist in Myanmar who is calling for massive genocide of the Rohingya people? Why isn't he banned on Facebook? And again, there's no, clear explanation from Facebook why people like him. Some people also criticize former Philippine president Rodrigo Duterte, who has engaged in this massive drug war where he just imprisoned people without due process. Countless numbers of people were tortured, perhaps even killed. Why is he glorified on Facebook when, by all international standards, he probably has, violated all kinds of, human rights violations. So again, these are questionable things, but there's no consistency. And we've already talked about, Ethiopia. That's another very troubling aspect of what's going on, where they're using the platform right now for mass killing and hate directed at certain minorities. So I would like to know, or not me, but I think the public at least deserves some kind of like an explanation, like how does Facebook make its determination? What's the standard? Is it maybe if they kill 5 people, that's okay, but if they kill 10 people, that's not okay? Is it where maybe the virus spreads 3 person per square mile, it's okay, but if it's 10 person per square mile, I mean, they got to have a more precise, clear understanding. And again, if we're dealing with some like startup company that's very obscure, I think you would give a lot more latitude for them to kind of work through these policies. But again, you're talking about a company who's probably worth about $300 billion with users all around the globe. And for them to just kind of pick and choose who they want to regulate or ban, I just think that's a very, it really lacks a lot of transparency, and that's very frustrating. Okay,
Yeah.
let's go.
Sorry, really quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I still think in terms of Facebook, I mean, it's still a social media platform. I mean, I think there can be, I believe they tried to set up some kind of Facebook council over there, but I don't know if it's actually gone through or they like actually are still having it there. I mean, I guess it's something, but it's like, it's a social media platform, but I guess the Facebook council thing is good in terms of dealing with situations like that. So if they do have something like that, I'll approve of that at least. But yet again, it's Facebook. So if Facebook is going to be in charge of the council, then they're going to approve things that will obviously benefit most likely in their favor. So I think there is still some factor that the government does need to step up and say, okay, you need to make a choice, Facebook. You can't display two ways. You have to say this, and if you do this, you have to follow the regulations, and that's that. I think the main issue with me, there needs to be some kind of accountability with Facebook, not this like, we don't know what to do with you, so do whatever. And if you get in trouble, we deal with you.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And that's a very interesting observation because, Facebook loves to just kind of like play a very passive, defensive, role when it comes to their accountability. Hey, we're just a tech company. I mean, people come and go as they please. What's really not accounted for is that we're going to have generations of people who grew up on this platform, whether if you're a teenager who was bullied, or maybe you have like an eating disorder because Instagram said, anorexia is cool and this is what you have to do. And this is, by the way, it's well documented in the whistleblowers, internal memos. So we're going to have, generations of people who will suffer from the social harms of what misuse of this platform does. We don't even know to what extent it has. And for them to just, kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, well, hey, we're just a tech company. I mean, don't come after us. I think that's very troubling. Another part that is kind of like, like a Faustian bargain is that Facebook says, hey, look, you could use Facebook for free. You don't charge for anything. You could come and go. If you don't like Facebook, simply delete your account. Of course, if you dig a little deeper, nothing is free. I mean, sure, there's no fee or monetary exchange for the use of their platform, but your privacy, your data, that is the digital currency of the current time. So, the price that we're all paying, if you happen to use Facebook, is that you are paying with the privacy and the data that the Facebook has on you, which in turn sells that to advertising companies for all these online ads. So that is something we should also think about too. Nothing is free. And by the way, also when you delete Facebook, it just doesn't simply get wiped off, kind of like, Hillary Clinton's server just kind of get wiped off. Just kidding, political joke. No, but the account stays there forever because, someone will hack into it and they could certainly reinstate the account. So, the idea that you could just simply come and go and delete it as you please, that's not true. It's very similar to when you delete an email. It just simply doesn't get wiped off the server. It still exists somewhere on the server. So this idea that there's no digital footprint, I think you're naive if you believe in that. All right, let's go to Colleen, Lorraine, and then back to Jen.
Hello, guys. Well, the main problem, I believe all of you can agree with me, is that actually Facebook as a platform is revealing that it is revealing the human nature in all its complexity. I mean, the ugly, the beauty, everything in between. It's really complex because in a way of how we communicate brings and shows different sides of us, of all of us, for sure. But because I'm in advertising, I think we as users usually see the newsfeed is something that brings, it's on our face. So we want to address the algorithms that regulate that, the influence that newsfeed has. But as an advertising person, which this is like a professional thing, that what I'm doing, trying to influence people, I just thought that probably it's good to bring the other side. I mean, the building of this huge amount of information, knowledge, personal knowledge, private information, and this is a huge, and there is obviously there are problems there because for some not a significant part of that acquisition of private information, it is hidden, and it is intentionally hidden by the companies, and you as user has no idea what is going on with your information, and that for sure is a problem. And also this information is very, I would say, you can expect this to be a big issue, although it is not taught as much as for the other stuff, other problems that Facebook faces, is because this database, this private information accumulation and analysis of such information is actually power. It can be political power, it can be money, but it is power. To have that influential power is something that many groups of the society want, or either to control, which basically is the same, or reinforce or put a particular kinds or throw away a particular narratives from that space. That space, in that sense, I also understand Facebook's position of being just a platform, in a sense that they want to stay away from that and be platform without engaging in a particular position. However, it is hardly possible. And there were some complaints from Republican Party members. I believe the elections 2016, they have complained that, for example, Facebook searches are biased. I can't recall now where the complaint was made, but they have made a research. They have made some experiments. For example, Ron Paul, about 2016, when it was written in a Facebook search, there was no results found. And similar, so it obviously points to the fact that Facebook does have a position in certain issues, and it is impossible to hold simultaneously the position that they are not engaged in controlling the content, and on the other side to have a position and do control it. And again, this brings again that my main point, that there is a really complex phenomena that we are discussing here, and we are, as users, are focused more on that particular visible part of Facebook, which is on our face, and not what is going on with the information and knowledge that is acquired by this. I just, if I may just briefly remind you about Cambridge Analytica scandal and the thing that they accumulated personal information by creating an app that makes you to take a psychological quiz, and they collect it because you allow the app to have access to all your information. They actually collected. They were pursuing that information, not so much to engage you or to make you enjoy the quiz itself. I mean, they for sure wanted you to enjoy it and share the result, but the main point was the information. They were pursuing that information. And again, because of that information and because of the new nature of that technology, I just to support the previous speakers that have spoken about, and the whistleblower that spoken about the influence on teens and etc., which are new phenomena which we will have to deal with it. But the thing is that because of the complex nature here, we should be careful in order not to jump and do too much and kill the things that are good, although with the good intentions. And in the end, I would just like to say that Andrea, I believe, said that Facebook is not changing. I kindly disagree with this, because actually Facebook goes through regular changes of their algorithms and etc. The different question is how much of these changes are fixing the problems or creating problems. This is a different question for sure, but the thing is that Facebook is constantly changing. It is not a static thing. They are regular. And the thing is that, again, as end users, and because of the media attention, which mostly is fixed on the content as narratives and stories and ideologies that are represented in Facebook, that media impression is a bit wrong, that Facebook is constantly staying, how to say, keeping the same stuff going on and on. Sorry for a bit incoherent speaking. The thing is that if there is another point to make, this also illustrates the complexity of the problem. There are too many things to say about the Facebook, and I hope that I managed at least to bring a few points that were expanding the discussion. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Colleen. No, your points were very important to this conversation. One thing that Colleen brought up was this Cambridge Analytica data breach, and this is really massive. And I know it got kind of brought up in the context of 2016 presidential election, but I believe about 50 million Facebook profiles were harvested by hackers, and because Facebook entrusted a third-party vendor, Cambridge Analytica, with the user, private information. I would use this analogy, and I think this is kind of like similar. So picture Facebook community as like some kind of like a commercial lodging, right? So you check in, whether if it's a hotel, some kind of like a long-term lodging. And I know Facebook doesn't make you pay, but again, we pay with our digital currency because it's our privacy that's being sold on the marketplace. And when you when you check into these, let's say like a hotel, to use an example, you have certain expectation of privacy. You have an expectation that no one is, eavesdropping on you. You have a privacy that there's not going to be any hidden surveillance cameras in the bathrooms. You have certain expectation of privacy that the hotel is not going to outsource your stay to another catering company who might, have certain incompetent measures when it comes to protecting and securing your privacy. I think that's kind of what happened here with the Cambridge Analytica data breach, in a sense that, again, Facebook, I know some of you think it's just like a tech platform. I think it's a virtual community. It's a virtual world that people live hours and hours every day. And people have a certain expectation of privacy when they go onto Facebook. Maybe they don't think about it, on a constant basis, but there is that expectation of privacy. Yes, I know there's no money exchange for the service, but again, we pay in other intangible ways. And an average Facebook user back in 2016 didn't really know that Cambridge Analytica was buying all this, private data of a user profile, and now they in turn use that, for other nefarious purposes. So I think this is where really Facebook came short, not in the sense that everything needs to be regulated, but what about transparency and disclosure? Dear user, I hope you're enjoying your Facebook usage so far. I just want to let you know that you have signed up for Cambridge Analytica. They have all this data on you. If you don't like it, then you could simply opt out of this account and cancel it. But none of it ever took place. All this took place behind the scenes. And Cambridge Analytica is just one example of many third-party vendors that Facebook partnered with because their investors, the shareholders, wanted growth and growth and more growth. So when everything is kind of pumped into this unrealistic expectation of quarterly growth, quarter after quarter, well, they have to find creative ways to do this. And unfortunately, there was a massive data breach. I think a lot of users lost faith in Facebook's ability to safeguard their privacy. But I think that's what happened. So I think that hotel analogy is somewhat apropos in a sense that, we do have certain expectation of privacy, but sometimes when that is breached, I think the host, whether it's the hotel or in this case, the platform, Facebook, they need to be answerable. And we haven't really heard much. Only thing that I hear from these Capitol Hill testimonies, other than the whistleblower, is always like, well, we could have done more sooner, but gosh darn it, we couldn't do enough. But next time we'll get this right, I promise. And then it just keeps happening over and over again. So I think that's really one of the frustrations. Okay, well, we have a lot of hands up here. So we'll try to get to most of them. We're also running out of time, so let's try to keep them fairly brief if we can. So Lorraine, Jim, and then Jacob.
I'll try to keep this brief. Maybe we need to have more, maybe the schools need to take up some of the responsibility in terms of teaching critical thinking, teaching kids to be more savvy about what these media platforms are doing. And maybe Facebook needs to be required to put public service announcements all over their sites, explaining a lot of the things that they aren't transparent about. Perhaps that's one way to do it. I still come back to, there are a lot of, I used to work in the food industry. There's a lot of foods that really are unhealthy for people, but we can't tell them to to make them healthier. They're going to put more sugar in because people like it better and they're going to eat it more. And we think that it's unhealthy, but we can't tell them not to make a breakfast cereal that has 1,000 calories in it. I just think that we're approaching it from the wrong point of view. We just have to protect people the way we protect consumers from everything. From bad banking practices and all sorts of other things. But the one question I have is, why hasn't there been any competitor? Why isn't, that they have bought up a lot of these smaller companies, but why doesn't somebody come out there, some entrepreneur, and come out there and make one that maybe is dedicated to not doing some of this negative stuff? And maybe everybody would flock to that one. I just think that that's a possibility that nobody ever considers. We keep talking about the beast, but we don't ever think about the fact that we're making it the beast. We had this conversation when we talked about Amazon. Remember, we said we're complaining about Amazon, but actually every single person who hated Amazon used Amazon. We make it this big beast, and then we complain that it's a beast. Why hasn't there been a competitor?
Thank you. I think
there are many social media. You're just showing your ignorance that you don't know about them, but there are many.
Well, Jacob, the
Thank
startup cost is, tremendous, and there's always, the transition cost. Yeah, I mean, there are other alternatives, but ultimately, I think people are complacent, and they try to, Facebook tries to make it very difficult for you to then transition into another platform, because then you have to refriend or reestablish your network. So it's almost like you're locked in. So it's not.
I'm not going to say anything till I get my turn.
Okay, thanks for speaking out loud. Let's go to Jim and then Jacob.
Well, the issue of Facebook, what's really revelatory is people should, I hope that she puts all these documents that she's dumped. I hope they're on a website, because what I'm seeing in the legal briefs is quite profound. Because one of them, this is a Facebook document itself. It basically talks about how political parties feel strongly that the change of the algorithm has forced them to skew negative in their communications on Facebook, with a downstream effect of leading them into more extreme policy positions. So then they cite in the document how in Poland, a social media team in the government has now shifted to 80% negative and 20% positive. And because negativity correlates well with expected value for number of outbound clicks. So negativity sells and works financially for Facebook. And, you raised Cambridge Analytica. I mean, Cambridge Analytica, they had 5,000 data points on every single individual American. They had 220 million Americans in that database. So the penetration of the psychographics they were able to use in terms of messaging down to district levels, congressional district levels in the 2016 race was quite profound. And we know that Cambridge Analytica was using Facebook information. I'm not even going to get into the Russian issue, because that's another question that occurs. And the issue that Marty raised earlier about the first, the free press issue. I remember the famous comment about you can't cry a fire in a crowded theater. It goes back to, I guess, Oliver Wendell Holmes, if I recall. But this is a different kind of situation, because some of us are familiar with the other, I guess Jacob was alluding to other social media things. I'm talking about 4chan. 4chan, someone hacked into 4chan and basically put out there all the messaging going on before January 6th, and also posted literally like an amazing, I forget who did it. I think Axios did this. They did like sort of 8 hours where you could essentially watch all the documentaries, all the different Facebook, videos that were taken by everybody on January 6th. And, conclusively proving that it wasn't a walk in the sun, as we're sort of hearing right now. And, you know, it's amazing that Facebook, I think, and social media do indeed reinforce these ridiculous notions that, you know, tens of millions of Americans have, that what happened on January 6th was just a visit to the Congress, which all of us know watching it on TV, it was certainly not a tourist visit to the Congress. So this has to change. Okay, this has to change. And I guess Lorraine's comment about the need for curricular change is part of it, because when they do studies of Generation Z kids, in terms of their knowledge of where they get information from, they're getting it from social media, about history, about social studies, etc. And I don't have to cite to this group because I've listened to people in this group before over the past couple of years. People are highly knowledgeable about history. That's unusual among the population in general, because Generation Z kids who are depending on Facebook in particular and other forms of social media for their sources of information, they have the most skewed political knowledge about American history and the Constitution. In fact, there are surveys that show that they consider democracy, quote, in quotes, as being something that they don't necessarily favor in polling. So that's sort of a very dangerous development. And, you know, I think that, you know, we can't underestimate the power of what we're dealing with here and the complexities of it.
Yeah, those are good points. Before we get to Jacob, one of the ideas that's kind of tossed around, which I think it's going to be counterproductive and it will have unintended consequence, is let's just say what Jim just mentioned about how some people think democracy is a very bad concept, right? And they have to show just the opposite view. You know, well, democracy is a good concept. Now, that sounds fine and good, but what if we go into things like somebody says violence is bad? Now, does Facebook have to then show the polar opposite view of that? No, violence is good. So sometimes we get into these kind of false equivalencies, and you know, we have to be careful what we expect out of these platforms, because we don't want them to drive these false equivalencies. So it's a very dangerous area. All right, let's go to Jacob and then Chris.
Okay, look, the plutocratic families and the corporate oligarchs already dominate the fourth estate, right? So we're being propagandized. We don't have accurate information. Now, what's the problem with Facebook, right? Facebook, since at least since I got on in 2010, they are deactivating people's accounts, you know, for you know, trying to get the truth out. There's truth tellers, right, who are doing the research, trying to get the information out to people. Look, Facebook is just a platform, right? It's like a telephone. It's a platform. And it's a platform for the people to do whatever they want. Leave us alone, right? Leave us alone, right? Now, what is Facebook doing? It's deactivating hundreds and hundreds and thousands probably, right, including me, on Facebook. It's shadow banning truth tellers. Google is doing this, Twitter is doing this, and so is YouTube. They're all doing this. Well, YouTube is owned by Google. So now, why all this fuss about all of a sudden lately now about Facebook? Because they're not doing it enough. They want to suppress everything. You get it? They're already suppressing. They're shadow banning, deactivating accounts, like I said, right? They've created algorithms so that you never see my work, right? So that unless you go directly to my link, right? You will never see the work of other truth tellers, right? They're already doing that. The plutocrats, the elite, the politicians are puppets, okay? They're not running the show, okay? They're just puppets. The puppet masters are mad at Facebook because they're not doing it enough. And we need a platform and platforms, many platforms, where the people can speak to each other, right? And speak whatever is on their mind, what they're seeing, right? And they don't like that. They don't want that. They don't want the right talking to the left or the middle. They want to, you know, keep everybody apart, separate us according to race, religion, ideologies, right? Because why? They know they're the few, we are the many. If we ever wake up and unite and find common ground, socioeconomic common ground, I mean, 93% of us make less than 150,000. We are the peasants, right, of this country. We are peasants, right? Now, we have common interests. Let us put aside our differences and let us work from common interests. If we ever unite, it's game over for the plutocrats. All their money will not be able to do anything, right? I mean, there'll be pushback, but they won't be able to defeat us. And they know that. And that's why they are suppressing information. That's why they're using technology to surveil everyone, because they're scared of us. They want to know, you know, I mean, look at what they were doing back in the 60s with Martin Luther King. Even when he was in high school, the FBI already had a file on him. Now that was in the 60s. Imagine what they have files on all of us now. In other words, they're scared. They're scared of us. And they're using technology. Now, why isn't the technology? Why aren't we up in arms with using technology to surveil them, right? Why is all this, you know, we seem so easy to be that, you know, we're being surveilled. What about them? Let us surveil them. They have the power. We the people, we're the little people, we're the peasants. We know not, you know, we can't do too much harm. We can maybe rob here, there, a little steal here, there. You know, this is you know, chicken feed, nothing. So they have the power to do immense harm, and they are doing immense harm. Therefore, we should use technology to bring the light to them, right? To know what they're planning, all their secrets, what they're up to, right? That's what we should be doing. And Facebook should be at the forefront of that, and all the others.
Okay, thanks, Jacob. Appreciate those passionate comments. All
I mean,
right,
look away. Just one more thing. Look at what they do to our whistleblowers, like Julian Assange, and hundreds of other whistleblowers that have risked their life, their livelihood, their careers, and everything. Look at how we treat them. We don't give them medals of honor. We don't uplift them. We don't reward them, right? They're all scared. They're all afraid. They're in prison. We some of them, you know, tortured, or they have to live in other countries. What kind of a country do we live in?
I'm sure Edward Snowden would certainly concur with your viewpoints there. All right, let's go with Chris and Andrew.
Edward Snowden is one of hundreds.
Yeah, so okay, I'll take this to a slightly different path. So I think you guys probably already talked tons about the Facebook itself. I actually just think the one thing that resonated with me was watching the overall testimony. It was pretty good testimony for over 3 hours. Was the discussion misdirected economic incentives and how difficult it is for the politician with no technical training to actually understand what she was saying. So I think the number one issue is there were about I think 25 different senators that actually asked questions, right, to her, and none of those people, I was checking, has you know, a computer science background. It was sad. So I mean, the question they were asking was very rudimentary. They don't really understand the basics. So I think the number one thing to fix, not just Facebook, but overall the tech industry, is you need more competent technocrats, right? That are in the position of power versus just these lawyers. That's all they're training for. If you look at their resumes, they're mainly lawyers and doctors, right? And more lawyers than doctors. So they're very good at arguing, but to really understand these very, very complex issues and how these companies make money, just a different competence is needed. Because without it, they can't really craft very good legislation, right? And their legislation will tend to fail, kind of like 230. And number two, related to that, is in European Union and Japan and China, they're talking about you know, creating value for the fifth economic good, right? So we always think about public good, that's like land, air, water. We think about private good, and we think about house, car, clothes, money, you know, money, that type of thing. So what we're failed to recognize for a long time, and this is why Facebook is a $1 trillion company and Google is almost a $1 trillion company, is that our personal data is very valuable in actual money terms, but nobody has put a monetary amount to it. So right now, basically, you know, if you sign up as a Facebook or Google Circle user, they'll say, oh yeah, give me your name, your information, everything else, your friend circle, and you can enjoy this fantastic virtual experience. What you don't understand is that you sign over a tremendous amount of monetary value for free by just doing that one click, right? Because what Facebook and all the other company does instead is right after you clicked, your information is being resold to third-party vendors, right? For commercial and marketing harvesting. At actually, it's not even, I can't even put because normally I can say for 100 times the price or 1,000 times the price. But in this case, it's infinite amount because they pay nothing basically for getting your personal information, right? And then turn around and resell your personal information for a tremendous value. And this is the base of their valuation. If you look at why their stock worth so much, it's because they're generating this tremendous profit without any cost, right? So I think the two key things, without getting into the technical mumbo jumbo or any kind of political structure revolution, right? Those two things are good. I just think they're more down the road. Just immediately, we need more technically competent people in the government by a lot. And second of all, related is we need to start quantify personal data as a actual good and put a value on it, a tremendous value. You know, like people were like, how much is it? It's like $10, $50. I think the way that some of the Chinese economists was valuing is more like $100,000, because you're thinking about this particular personal information over the lifetime of the individual and the entire circle of his or her friends, right? And all their personal information. So you're harvesting a tremendous amount. And as the economy becomes more digital, that's really where all the transactions made. Right now, all the money on those data is being made by the corporations, and the individual gets nothing of their own personal information. So I think that's, at the end, is probably the biggest economics disincentives that's allowing for some of these misbehaviors. I'm good.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Let's go to Andrew next.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that with the last person said. Yeah, it seems like with Facebook, it's more like a manufacturing consent kind of situation. It's like, well, you can use our platform, but if you don't agree to our services, it's like, well, you're not going to use our platform. And the thing with Facebook is that it's so big that literally most of the discourse is on Facebook and even Twitter. And the issue with also another issue is that most people in our Congress don't even know what a cloud means. So my main fear, also my main hope, is that hopefully we will get to a point where we do have people who do know the ins and outs of social media and how to control these giants. But I'm also fearful to the point that we might be too late and these people might get too big that you can't do nothing about them. But there has been cases in terms of the tobacco industry, them being held accountable and some restrictions on them. Also, there has been also issues with people getting seatbelts in their cars. So if there's enough pressure on these companies, hopefully there will be some changes to their TOS to hopefully make a good, better platform for everyone. But I also think that people just need to go outside and touch some grass. That's also my other issue as well. A lot of people are pretty lonely nowadays. Not a lot of people are necessarily contacting with everyone face to face. So it seems like there's more communication going about rather than actual community based efforts going about. So as things progress forward, I hope more people will go outside and touch grass, and hopefully there will be more people in charge that can deal with these issues before it gets out of hand.
Thanks, Andrew. And just to reply to your comment, sometimes people say, well, let the free market just kind of dictate how certain bad conduct is regulated, right, instead of government action. And this is one instance where I don't think free market will certainly, I'm sorry, this is one instance where free market will not help regulate that behavior, because if you look at the ownership of the outstanding shares of Facebook, Zuckerberg owns 55% of the shares. So he's the majority. So he could just veto every idea or opposition coming from the shareholders. So I wouldn't hold your breath if you're waiting for the shareholders to step up and say, well, it's time to have a shareholders derivative lawsuit against Facebook. That's not going to happen. So anyway, just something else to think about. Okay, let's go to Pete.
Yeah, and I think the other issue, we've been talking a lot about is data and privacy, and I think this is another case where, we can't be looking to the companies themselves to make the changes. Really, I think it's a societal question of, we've kind of made this bargain of we want free goods, we'll pay for it with our data, but if we look in other countries, they've actually, tried to tackle this issue in Europe with their general data privacy regulations. They've reshifted the focus and said, actually, no, individuals own their data. They have the right to tell companies to take, remove data from them, that they can't sell their individual data without the knowledge of that individual, that they have to directly opt into these types of things, not opt out from some obscure spot on the website. So I think that all of these, I think it's really just about our contract and our relationship, and as a society thinking about where do we want to put that, do we want to focus that ownership of data back to individuals, and that's how we can actually protect privacy. And Facebook and all of the, Google and such, they all have to comply with this in Europe. So it's definitely, it's not like an impossible thing to get them to do so.
All right. Thanks, Pete. We're almost running out of time. I know, Jim, you have your hand up, but I do want to get to the last question, which is, should there be some kind of dismantling or breakup of Facebook? Is it just too big as a company? So I don't know, Jim, if you want to address that question, but that's something I want to address or discuss amongst everyone here. So, Jim, what do you think? Jim, are you there? Jim's not there. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
I'm here.
Okay.
I thought you were going to talk about Section 230. At some
just
point.
briefly on. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. So if you want to just briefly talk about.
Well, I'm a big defender of Section 230 because I think that if it was eliminated, you wouldn't have blogs, you wouldn't have review sites, you wouldn't have forums where issues could be dealt with. They'd be pressured to be silent. You'd have Huntington Post, Google, they could be sued every time a user crossed the line. Innovation, one of the issues that's always argued with Section 230 is its maintenance is one of the reasons why there's been such innovation in the internet and such innovation. Now, we can get into the social costs, and what we've been discussing for 2 hours is all the problems raised by these issues. But I think that Section 230 is something that is a big target politically. I know they're going to eventually go after it. And I'm one of those who is in favor of not altering it. And yes, to break up a Facebook, we're reaching the point where these are like public utilities. I mean, someone could seriously argue that the need for these are a question of public utility. Now, the problem with that is that a public utility, of course, would be legally governed very differently than a private business. So the question of breaking it up is a very difficult one. And I'm pretty sure we're going to be facing the issue of breaking it up politically, because let's say the midterms lead to the Republicans coming back in control of the House and the Senate. I am positive we're going to start to hear hearings that focus in on breaking up Facebook and knocking out Section 230.
Thanks, Jim. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Section 230, this is a massive legislation back in '96. I think it's called the Communications Decency Act. And the idea was that back in '96, during the infancy of the dawn of the internet, they wanted to make the online platform to be very economically prosperous and viable. So in order to protect certain publishers, they wanted to provide a legal shield So if somebody goes onto some blog site or some news website and posts a comment that is inflammatory, that is defamatory, the publisher is not held liable because, again, publisher is just a platform. It's just a domain that provides, the exchange of viewpoints. I think that was the right approach. But again, that was back in '96. And I think the proponents of those who want to modify Section 230 says, well, we are way past, Web 2.0. People's lives are dependent on the web, especially, websites like Facebook, and it's no longer just a tech platform. People's lives are integrated into these platforms. So rather than changing it, maybe it's just time to reconsider how we as users interact with these platforms. And should there be more safeguards in place for that? Maybe not curtailing free speech, but other engagements that we do, such as, e-commerce, joining other groups, that kind of thing. Again, that's a hotly debatable topic. Unfortunately, we don't have time to get into that right now, but Jim does bring up a good point. We have to wrap it up in about 5 minutes. So just very quickly, I know Chris and Colleen, you have your hands up. If you want to address, the proposed breakup of Facebook, whether if you think that's a good idea, a bad idea, feel free to do that. But we just have like 5 minutes left, so please bear that in mind.
Okay, I'll be real quick. So I'll actually talk a little bit about that at 2:30. I think kind of just like what you said, Thomas. A good policy from 20, 30 years ago, it doesn't need to be destroyed. That definitely can be amended, right? Based on the times. That's good with any policy. Regarding Facebook, I believe from the whistleblower and I didn't hear anybody who says, let's break them up. I think it's really one of the reasons, from a practical speaking, they're getting to a point where they're so tied in with our society that, breaking them up will cause tremendous havoc, right? I think the key here is that the original purpose from a national security and competition point of view is we saw 230 will give the United States a huge leg up over other countries in terms of by not constraining these technology companies who were able to leapfrog like everybody else. But because these companies are not so engaged around the world, I think this particular advantage is not so apparent anymore, just from a nationalist point of view. And when we look at other big companies similar to Facebook, like Alibaba and Tencent in China, or like the big media distributor in Russia, they have self-censorship. They have their own rules, right? Not saying those rules are perfect. It's just basically saying that other company in the same situation now governed in the U.S. do abide by more stringent rules, that their society requires. So that might be something that we look at. But breakup is the practical solution. I don't think from anybody. I haven't heard that from anybody.
Okay, thanks. I think Senator Warren of Massachusetts proposed that idea when she was running for the presidency back in 2019, 2020.
She did, but because she was in that hearing. I think she no longer. Yeah, I think somebody much smarter in her cabinet had told her. That's so stupid. So I don't think she's saying that anymore. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Last but not least, Colleen. Andrew, I know you have your hand up, but unfortunately we're out of time, and I do have another engagement I need to attend to. So Colleen will be next.
I will be also very quick. I will address what just Chris said about the breaking. It's actually the essence of the lawsuit that was earlier in the conversation mentioned, the FCC suit against Facebook. And the argument, I believe, is that by acquisition of Facebook, of Instagram and WhatsApp, and because of the integration of the three platforms, the share of Facebook on social media is exceeding. However, during the summer, federal judge throw the suit. I mean, he said that the FCC has not provided enough evidence to argument enough sufficiently to argue their position. And another point, just want to make that according to Washington Post, at the end of the previous year, Facebook actually even proposed to offer to its code and user relationships for other companies to create their own versions of the social network, but FCC did not. I'm not sure if FCC exactly made the decision, but that was denied as an option. However, it indeed is proposed to break back to Instagram and WhatsApp and compete Facebook against the two other platforms. This was just summary of the suit.
Okay, thanks, Colleen, for those comments. So we do need to wrap it up, but I guess one last final comment I would make is, look, I mean, we are in the infancy of social media world. I mean, we think this platform that we're using right now is the latest and the greatest because we are just so, wowed by all these, bells and whistles. But I mean, we can't even fathom how our lives will be integrated with social media in decades to come, where I think the future generations will have virtual reality, and that's going to be their world, not this, physical world that we belong to. So I think it's really important that we get this right, because if we don't, and if we take a very kind of a haphazard approach to making sure that this platform is a safe place, if we don't get it right, like I really think it's going to be a very dark place in the future where our lives will be integrated with these platforms. So anyway, I guess that remains to be seen. Sorry to end it on such a doom and gloom notes, but we'll have plenty of other pleasant things to talk about in the future. So thanks once again, everyone, for joining tonight's conversation. It was very enlightening, and I will see you next time. Take care.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thanks, Thomas.
Yes,
Thank you, Thomas.
Have a good one.